My name is Angelique Jenny, and I'm the Woods Homes Research Chair in Children's Mental Health here at the University of Calgary at the Faculty of Social Work. Before we begin today, we'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples of the Treaty 6 region and the Métis Settlement and Métis Nation of Alberta, Regions 2, 3, and 4. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our community. Today in this video, we will review some of the barriers, stigma, values, and beliefs surrounding mental illness and suicide. When we meet as a group, we will then discuss some of the impact these elements can have on your work as natural leaders. Before we get started, it's important to differentiate between mental health and mental illness. The Canadian Mental Health Association describes mental health as something we all have. It is a state of well-being. Examples of good mental health include a sense of purpose, strong relationships, feeling connected to others, having a good sense of self, coping with stress, and generally enjoying life. Mental illness is described as disturbances in thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that are severe enough to affect day-to-day functioning. Examples of mental illness include mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and concurrent disorders such as addictions and substance abuse. Mental illness can be absent in mental health, but living with a mental illness does not mean living without mental health. Just like a person living with diabetes can live a healthy lifestyle, a person with a mental illness can also have good mental health. Risk and protective factors will be talked about at length in a later section of this training. Risk factors are a variety of variables that may increase a person's risk of presenting with suicidal behavior or ideation. Protective factors are characteristics that make a person less likely to engage in suicidal behavior. A variety of factors can converge for an individual to present with suicidal behavior and/or ideation. These factors can be cultural. For example, feeling a sense of belonging and connection with people who share the same language or traditions. Social. Some social risk factors commonly highlighted in the literature are family factors, such as family discord and maltreatment, as well as access to health care. Psychological. An example of a psychological factor is a sense of isolation after a challenging life event, for example. Discrimination, which we see as behavior, prejudice, which we experience as attitudes, and stereotypes, which are beliefs, are still commonly faced by people with mental illness. These three elements are important aspects of stigma. Stigma can prevent people from seeking out services. Stigma can perpetuate suicide. Stigma has been linked to suicidality, and individuals who have attempted suicide have been found to minimize their experiences to avoid being negatively labeled. This means that due to stigma, many individuals miss the opportunity to find support and receive treatment. Corrigan and his colleagues in 2017 generated items to create a suicide assessment scale and created a survey based on the items that were provided by participants. The quotes on the screen are examples of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination provided by individuals in a qualitative research project around stigma. Stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination can negatively impact different groups of people. Stigma can also impact suicidal behavior and ideation. The stigma associated with mental illness and suicide can negatively impact health-seeking behavior. Lack of help-seeking behavior is usually connected with individuals feeling that they're not able to ask for help. By providing social support, fighting stigma, and providing care, communities have a critical role in suicide prevention. There are different types of stigma. Public stigma can impact the way individuals perceive themselves. Stigma can be a barrier to support because perceived stigma and discrimination can negatively impact help-seeking behavior. Research indicates that addressing public and individual stigma can contribute to suicide prevention. In the this training, we'll address some of the main risk factors that can impact on suicidal behavior and ideation. From an ecological perspective, risk factors can be present at different levels. For example, societal factors, community-based factors. Some of these risk factors can be connected to barriers in your community for youth to ask for help. Barriers tend to be specific to the context. Stigma can be a contextual barrier for a student, for example, to access supports. By identifying barriers, students at risk are more likely to receive support. As a natural helper, you might be more familiar with different barriers that impact your community, the relationships within it, and individual factors, particularly those connected with your school. Different communities can have different barriers to providing support for individuals who experience suicidal thoughts and ideation. We will have a chance to explore these next. There are a variety of barriers that can be present at the community, relationship, or personal levels. Gould and colleagues in 2009 screened for suicidal risk in a sample of students in New York. They identified some of the barriers that were identified by parents and youth in their sample. More than half of the participants reported different perceptions about mental health problems. For example, they did not think the child had a problem, or the problem was not serious enough for them to ask for support. The authors also pointed to the need to screen for suicide in youth. Lack of knowledge and skills to support youth who engage in suicidal thoughts or behaviors is also really important. Stigma can prevent people from seeking out services. Stereotypes connected to suicide have shown that people feel that individuals who engage in suicidal behavior can be weak, crazy, or in distress. Similarly, in terms of prejudice and discrimination, the public may not trust people who attempt suicide or doubt what they say. Stigma can also have an impact on the family system. For example, the lack of acceptance of LGBTQ2SIA+ youth has been identified as an important risk factor in suicidality. Likewise, men who are raised to adhere to stereotypical masculine norms, for example, that support or suggest the restriction of emotion, or who are in environments that reinforce norms like toughness and emotional invulnerability, are at risk. These norms present a barrier to seeking help. To summarize, there is a difference between mental health and mental illness. 1 in 5 people have a mental illness, but 5 out of 5 people have mental health. Risk factors may increase the likelihood a person's presentation of suicidal behavior or ideation, and protective factors may decrease the likelihood. Risk factors can be connected to barriers at the community, relationship, or personal levels. Different types of stigma can perpetuate suicide as it prevents people from seeking out treatment. Thank you so much for your time today. Here are some additional references should you wish to look into them.